the automatons of ancient Greece. Starting in the 3rd century BC, the Greeks started making ingenious machines. Some of the devices they invented were useful, such as water clocks and even alarm clocks. Yet most of the devices they created were mere curiosities, more like ingenious toys than useful machines. Yet many of these technologies would later change the world forever during the Industrial Revolution. The first Greek to build these machines was Ctesibius, who got the idea when he was using weights to lift a heavy mirror in his father's barbershop. He had these weights move down cylinders, and these cylinders had a closed bottom, and he noticed that this caused the weights to slow down inside the cylinder because the air underneath it got compressed. This discovery led to the field of pneumatics, the use of air pressure in devices. Ctesibius used pneumatics for a number of important inventions. This included an ingenious clock, which worked throughout the year, and even more important, a piston-driven pump, with the piston still used today in many devices, including engines. And he also invented the hydraulis, which is a water organ working on air pressure. Another early engineer was Philo of Byzantium, who added many other inventions, including a cup that automatically refilled to a set height. And a few centuries later came Nero of Alexandria, who created automatic temple doors, the world's first vending machines, and also an ingenious fountain. But his most important invention was the Aeolipile, which uses heat from a fire to cause a sphere to rotate. And this is the first example of a steam engine in history. And it could have started the Greek Industrial Revolution had Nero overseen the implications of his invention. So we have a lot to get to. Let's start. Hey, good to see you. This is Stephan, author of In Search of the Sublime. On this World History channel, we'll trace humanity's relentless pursuit of scientific truth, moral excellence, and enlightenment. You'll meet anyone from Mesopotamian astronomers and Indian yogis to Greek philosophers and Enlightenment scientists. And you'll meet them firsthand using primary sources, giving you valuable insights that transcend the surface-level understanding you get on other channels. So go check it out for yourself. Let's start. The father of pneumatics was a man named Ctesibius, who worked in Alexandria in Egypt in the 3rd century BC. His own writings have unfortunately not survived, yet his inventions are mentioned by a number of later writers, including Vitruvius from the 1st century BC. Vitruvius tells us that Ctesibius was the son of a barber, and that he had made for his father a mechanism for raising and lowering his heavy mirror. Just like in an elevator today, the mechanism included counterweights that could move up and down in the opposite direction of the mirror. And he had these weights move in cylinders, and these cylinders had a closed bottom. He soon discovered that these weights moved very slowly in these cylinders, and this problem was solved by making holes in the bottom of these cylinders, for this prevented a buildup of air pressure by allowing that air to escape through that hole. But then something else happened. We read, "Thus, when the weight ran down into narrow tubes and compressed the air, the large amount of air was condensed as it ran violently down through the mouth of the tube and was forced into the open. And meeting with that obstacle, the air was produced as a clear sound. So because that air was violently pressed to that small hole, a sound became audible." So in one go, Ctesibius learned about the compression of air, and also that this can be used to make sounds. And as we shall see, he later applied both of these discoveries for his invention of the water organ, the first keyboard instrument in history. But let's first discuss his sophisticated water clock. Water clocks, or clepsydras in Greek, have a long history dating back at least to before 1500 BC in Egypt and Babylon, with the oldest surviving one being from Egypt from 1380 BC. The earliest versions consisted of a vessel that was filled with water, and this water slowly flowed away through a hole in the bottom. A scale drawn on the inside of the vessel then told how much time had passed. A simple but effective system. The Greeks and Romans used these clocks, for instance, in courts, where speakers had limited speaking time. And we read, if a speech was interrupted, the hole of the water clock was temporarily closed, so not to waste his speaking time. And in Rome, these devices were also used to time each course in the Circus Maximus. Very useful applications. The system had a downside, however. As the water level in a vessel starts to decline, the water pressure at the bottom of the vessel decreases, leading to a slower outflow of water. That is, the water doesn't decline at a steady rate. This can be improved somewhat by making the vessel smaller at the bottom, as you can see here. Yet it is close to impossible to do accurately. And on top of this, viscosity effects also change with pressure, making the shape hard to calculate in advance. An improved model, also from Egypt, instead used a reservoir which dripped water into a receiving vessel that had the time scale. And these are called inflow water clocks, because the water flows into the clocks, as opposed to the outflow water clocks we discussed previously. This system works better if the reservoir is filled to the top, which requires a constant supply of water, for instance from an aqueduct. And if too much water is added, it can simply overflow as long as the water level in the reservoir stays the same. And this is the following effect. With a constant water level, we have equal water pressure at the bottom of this reservoir, and as a result we have a steady, constant outflow of water into that receiving vessel. Now we move to the water clock of Ctesibius. He used the system just described, but with some extra tricks. For instance, he added a float underwater, with on top of it a figure that points to the time of the day on a cylinder, as you can see here. And at this point I have to tell you about Greek and Egyptian timekeeping, which was more complicated than today by the fact that they divided both daylight hours and nighttime hours in 12 equal parts. But since the amount of daylight hours changes during the year, so does the length of an hour in the Greek system. And Ctesibius could also account for this by rotating that cylinder around, thereby changing the length of the hour that the figure was pointing to. And then another trick. Once the day was over, the water tipped over the top of a siphon, which caused the vessel to quickly drain to reset the clock. And a siphon works as follows. As the water level increases, the water in the siphon will be at the same level. And if the water level rises enough, it will eventually tip over the edge of the siphon, as you can see here. But the falling water will now leave behind a vacuum. And as a result, the air pressure on the water inside the container now beats the zero pressure of the vacuum, and the water is therefore pushed upwards through the siphon, and this continues until the container is fully empty. A brilliant device. And by the way, the basic principle of the siphon also goes back to at least 1500 BC Egypt. For instance, here we see Egyptians sucking water down a tube from one vessel in order to move it to a lower vessel. And you've probably seen this in real life at some point. Once the water is moving through that tube, it just keeps on moving until the top vessel fully empties. And now the final trick of Ctesibius' water clock. The water that fell from the siphon fell on a water wheel that would start to rotate. And this would cause that cylinder to rotate. And it would take 365 days for that cylinder to make a full rotation giving the correct time throughout the year in that Greek system. A brilliant device. An even more important invention by Ctesibius was the piston-driven pump. For during the Industrial Revolution some 2000 years later, similar pistons were used in engines. So let's discuss it now. It used two piston heads, you can see them here, that moved up and down inside two cylinders. If, for instance, you push the piston on the left down, then water is pressed to this valve, and then upward through the pipe in the middle. And in this way you can pump water upwards, while the valve at the bottom is closed by the push of the water, as is this valve on the right. Meanwhile, the piston on the right lifts upward, and as it does so, it leaves a vacuum behind, and water is then immediately pushed in to fill that vacuum, causing the water to move upward. And this opens the valve on the bottom right, allowing new water to flow into the system. And the system is then reversed, with now the right side moving down, pressing that new water upwards through the pump, and the left side goes upwards, sucking in new water. One of the greatest inventions of mankind. And a few centuries later, Nero of Alexandria made the comment that this machine could be used for firefighting. And in fact it has been used for exactly this for centuries. Now we come to Ctesibius' organ, known as the hydraulis. Similar to the pump we've just discussed, it used two pistons. And this time these pistons compress the air inside the organ. Here the piston on the right moves upward. It causes the air to move into the central chamber, and it causes this valve to close. While meanwhile the piston on the left moves downward, creating a lower pressure, and as a result air from the outside pushes this valve open, allowing new air into the system. On top of the machine you see 24 pipes, in this figure only 12 but originally 24. And they are attached to 24 keys that can be played. And when one of these keys is played, air can escape from inside the organ and can move through the pipe, creating a sound. And the different lengths of these pipes create different tones. Now let's discuss the water in the center, and this is the reason why the organ is called the hydraulis, with hydra meaning water. When air is pumped into the system, it causes higher pressure in the organ, causing the water level to lower. And because the water level is now higher on the outside, this water presses down, creating an upward pressure inside the organ. And because the water surface on the inside is made extra wide, releasing some air through the pipes on top has little influence on the height of the water and therefore on the pressure. So the water acts as a buffer to stabilize the pressure inside the machine, allowing the musician to play stable notes. And here, by the way, you can see such a device, here in a mosaic, on a coin, and here an actual water organ from antiquity. And this is how such an organ sounds. As you might have noticed, this system still requires pistons to be moved by hand. But this machine was later improved by Nero, who added a wind wheel to power the organ. There's also been some discussion among scholars whether Ctesibius' organ was inspired by an earlier invention by Plato. We read in Athenaeus, "It is said that Plato imparted a slight hint of the construction of the water organ, in having made a timepiece for use at night, which resembled a water organ, being a very large water clock." So please remember these details. It is like a water organ, so presumably it makes a sound. It looks like a very large water clock, and it is a timepiece to use at night. This sounds like an alarm clock. And presumably he used this to be on time in the morning for his lectures at the famous Academy of Plato. One plausible reconstruction from 1915 has it work something like this. The top vessel here slowly releases water throughout the night in a second vessel, and this second vessel contains a siphon. And when the top of this siphon is reached, presumably in the morning, this second jar quickly empties into the third jar, quickly compressing the air in the third jar, allowing a whistle to blow. But it is quite plausible that we're simply reading too much in that simple single quote. And it also doesn't match the consensus among the Greeks that Ctesibius was the first to invent pneumatics, for Plato was from a century earlier. And by the way, we do know that Ctesibius created alarm systems, connecting his water clock to the sound of falling pebbles, a gong and a trumpet, although it is nowhere written that he used these alarm systems in order to wake up in the morning. Another early engineer was Philo of Byzantium, who created dozens of devices. His work, called Pneumatics, exists today only in an Arabic version, apart from some fragments in Latin. And let's now discuss a number of his inventions. Here we see a container of water that will automatically refill to the same height. If someone scoops out some water from the cup here, this opens up a tube on the left, allowing air to flow into an airtight container. And as a result, water will flow into the original cup until that tube is again blocked by the water. For now, no new air can flow in, and therefore the water cannot flow out, otherwise the air pressure in the airtight container will drop. And here is a strange device that operated by an inflow of water, where birds will start to chirp through air pressure, but only when an owl turns away from them. And the motion of the owl happens when a siphon empties quickly, allowing a rope and a weight to turn the pedestal on which the owl stands. A very pointless, but still creative invention. And Philo also designed an automatic servant. When you put a cup in his hand, because of the weight of the cup, the hand would move down a little bit. And this would cause an air hole to open up that allowed wine to flow from another vessel into that cup. And this causes the cup to get even heavier, causing the hand to move down even more, closing that air hole again. And as a result, the wine stops pouring. And if you then keep the cup there, eventually another hole opens up to add water to the cup to dilute the wine until that closes down as well. And finally, I want to mention Philo's theater, which showed different painted scenes, with doors opening and closing between the scenes. And there were also many moving pieces. A man hitting wood with a hammer, dolphins appearing from the sea, ships moving, and the goddess Athena appears as well. And at some point a fire is lit, and we have sound effects for the hammer, and a weight is dropped at the end to simulate thunder. Then, a few centuries later, there was the text Pneumatics of Nero of Alexandria, likely from the 1st century AD. Nero for the most part repeated the designs of Philo, sometimes with some improvements, but he also made some interesting devices himself. Take for instance his automatic temple doors. The fire of a sacrifice in the temple would cause air to heat up in a container, which increased its pressure. And this pressure then caused water to be pushed from one container to another. And as a result, because of the extra water, the second container became heavier, causing that container to descend. And because of this motion, through some ropes, the doors of the temple opened. And once the temperature cooled down again, the water returns back to the first vessel, causing the second vessel to become lighter again. And because of a counterweight on the other side, the system moves back again and the doors close. And here you can see a vending machine, which was also used in temples. When a coin is dropped in, a plug opens, allowing some holy water to flow down a tube into a cup. And here is an ingenious magic trick to turn water into wine. Water here is poured into an airtight vessel, allowing the pressure of the air to increase. And this increased pressure through this tube then pushes out wine in the second vessel. And here is Hero's fountain. The water at the top falls down a tube to the bottom container, causing the air pressure here to increase, because the air takes up less space because of the water. And this increases the pressure in the middle container, causing water to be pushed upward, creating a fountain. But Hero's most important invention is the Aeolipile. A fire is lit below a sphere filled with water, and as a result the water boils, causing expanding steam. And the steam then flows out through two nozzles, causing the sphere to spin. And there's also a version where the setup causes figures to dance around in circles, as you can see here. Crucially, the Aeolipile is the first steam engine in world history, and could have led to a Greek industrial revolution had Hero overseen the implications of his invention. And by the way, it has been hypothesized that the availability of slave labor created less incentive for the Greeks and the Romans to search for such solutions. We end with one beautiful curiosity from Rome. Also in the 1st century AD, we read of a revolving dining room in the Golden House, or the Domus Aurea, which was the palace of Emperor Nero. And this dining room was likely powered by a water wheel, and it was said to slowly rotate day and night. We read, "The main banquet hall was circular and constantly revolving day and night like the heavens." So with a rotation period of 24 hours. And thus unfolded the invention of the Greek automatons. The creation of automatons was later picked up by the Muslims during the Islamic Golden Age. But that will be a topic for another day. For now, I hope you were inspired. And if you want to know more about ancient Greece, or any other topic from world history, then read my book In Search of the Sublime. You can read it completely for free on worldhistorybook.com, or you can buy a physical copy on Amazon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.